So this discussion is really essential, particularly now. I think most of us will recognise that we need to shift views on this topic and move the country to a better place on thinking about how we improve housing in this country. How do we make sure more people have the home that they need? How do we support people with their housing and also campaign for change? Is it time now to think about housing as a human right in a way that it hasn't been before? Good afternoon. Thank you very much for attending this session. My name is Chris Wood. I'm an assistant director at the housing charity Shelter. I'm really glad to be chairing this session. I think we all know how crucial a topic affordable housing across the UK is. I mean, for decades, not enough has been done to ensure people have fit housing across the UK. And all of that has been made worse by the coronavirus, not just in the UK, but across the world. In England, there's now hundreds of thousands of people who've gone into rent arrears since the beginning of the pandemic, 322,000 at our last estimate. So we've got some really good international speakers on this to hear from international examples on what they might mean for the UK and other countries to think about affordable housing and how we can view housing as a human right. Dr. Orna Rosenfeld, who's a global housing advisor and research scientist, and is the current advisor for the European Investment Bank.
Thank you, Chris. Delighted to be here. I'm pleased to join the colleagues from Vienna and Boston on this specific session. I would like to add to this conversation something more about the housing continuum and mainly a broader view on the housing market. And this is only just to kind of sparkle discussion about what the next challenges may be and what are the issues that we will have to tackle as the result of the pandemic in medium and long term. I would look at the emerging trends and challenges in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on the housing system in high-income economies. This is a study that is in process. I would then briefly look at the recommendations that are coming up right now in the international arena among international institutions, and then move on to discuss with you the opportunity for transformation and building inclusive urban futures in the after COVID. So I would just like to add a little bit of statistic on what the Special Rapporteur on Housing has already mentioned in the context of the UK. If we are looking at the statistics in the EU, UK, US, Australia, what we can see is that several governments have implemented short-term responses during the COVID lockdown. These included suspending evictions in 11 EU countries, including the UK, taking care of providing emergency shelters for the homeless in 7 EU countries and the UK. Taking care of the renters has been one of the key concerns in 9 EU countries that implemented in different combination the following short-term responses. This is extending rental contracts, freezing rental increases, subsidizing rent payments, and reducing rent. But by far the most popular, as it were, intervention was one of forbearing mortgages. 13 EU countries, UK, US, and Australia have implemented this move, supporting the homeowners through the crisis. We have had other short-term measures, such as supporting mortgage payments, construction sector, and so on. As we move through the crisis, and short-term measures begin to be phased out slowly, I think it is important to look at some of the trends in construction, employment, investment, production, and consumption of housing to just kind of start to think about what medium and a long-term solution might be. So people and housing. COVID-19, I believe, has brought decades of housing policy achievements globally into a limelight and throw into a stark relief their weaknesses and failures. Housing need, as we all know, has increased after the global financial crisis. We have seen that 80 million people in EU and the UK are housing cost overburdened, spending 40% of their income on housing. And these are some of the statistical categories that came up in terms of the people who are facing housing challenges in terms of lack of housing affordability, lack of access to housing, and so on and so forth. And in this sense, the COVID-19 has only laid bare the economic and housing inequalities that we already have. Of course, the COVID-19 affects us all, but the pressure is not evenly distributed among all people and all places. So I think it's worth of looking at the projections of future employment at this moment. We're 4 months out of the confinement. These are very interesting statistics from the OECD coming on the possible employments depending on scenarios, health scenarios of development of COVID. In next year or so. So what is quite interesting to see is that 30% of people in the OECD countries holding low-paying jobs have lost their jobs in comparison to only 14% of the high-income people in the same countries. So if we are looking back at this 30%, there are three groups that seem to be affected disproportionately, and these are women and low-paid workers, part-time, temporary, self-employed workers, and young people. And here I would just like to support you on this point, Chris, as well, that as in the UK, in Europe and in other high-income countries, there is a concern that the pandemic would plunge the COVID-19 generations, those people who are under 25, into a dark age of declining social mobility because of the rising economic and educational inequalities. And actually, the housing inequalities can actually cement these inequalities in space in our country, in different territories. So construction sector, as we all know, has been heavily impacted by the crisis, although there have been differences between countries, as the graph here shows. Current data suggests that activity is expanding, but from a very low level. We see delays, continuing distancing requirements that are needed in construction sites, disrupted supply chains. In many countries, it will take some time until before the residential construction reaches the pre-COVID-19. In countries where the construction has been heavily impacted, like here in France, the concern is that the backlog that we have seen, the shortage of housing, will be basically this new delay will add to the current and existing shortages, and therefore worsen access to affordable housing in the future. Of course, on the positive note, there are thoughts about developing the sector in terms of making it more digitalized, using more prefabrication, moving toward environmentally friendly construction. But this will take time, especially considering the state the industry is in right now. The story that is contrasting to that one of the construction is the one of PropTech, or property technology. The property technology has advanced during this crisis, during confinement. The practices that have been experimental just at the beginning of this year are now becoming accepted and mainstream. This is a list of some of the new property technology solutions that are really becoming a mainstream, including the closing process digitalization, virtual tours, expansion of the short-term property management platforms, and more. I think that there are 2 points that I would like to emphasize here. These practices are likely to make the consumption, the international consumption and investment in residential real estate easier. So that is important that as we go through this, the examination of what is going on in this sector, to look for for those companies that are providing positive social impact in the housing markets, in addition to commercial benefit that they may secure. I think that it's very interesting to look at, and especially in comparison to previous crises, the data from US, France, Spain suggests that the long-term lasting effects on home prices may be very limited on national scales. But the price differentiation may play out differently in different submarkets. And that raises questions about the future of territorial development. We see here the example from Spain, where different regions basically respond differently in terms of price, depending on the share of the population that was infected by COVID-19. Global and capital cities showed moderate slowdown in housing price increase to limited and change. Here, there is a warning again, as in the UK, of development of two-tier property sector in which those with insecure jobs or small deposits find it very hard or harder than ever to afford or access home. We have mortgage rules that are tightening right now, and that is actually pushing many people into the rental sector. So just to give a short overview, we have a construction industry that was hit hard with reduced supply in the short term, prop tech that is advancing, housing prices that seem to be not as challenged as in the previous crisis, employment that is decreasing, and what concerns us all is increasing inequality if we do nothing. So here I would like to give a very, very quick and short overview of the recommendations that are coming out up now in the international arena. My team and I have been surveying recommendations provided by different international organizations in this moment to see what are the key trends, what is the discourse, where is the discourse moving. So the short-term measures related to housing, as well as universal transfers to businesses and individuals, were of course welcome. But the discussion today revolves around the manner and keeping or phasing out of these interventions and their potential longer-term policy trades-off. Clearly, these measures and their combination differed between countries and within the countries, but there are two main takeaways from my perspective on the short-term measures. First is that these rapid-fire and static housing policies and intervention implicitly acknowledged some of the long-term structural deficits of housing systems around the world. And second, clearly, they show the ability, power, and decisiveness of the governments to effectively intervene in housing systems and housing markets. So this is, I think, something this is the momentum to actually build upon when looking at longer-term and medium-term solutions. Now, I would like to move on to some of the very, very clear, broad messages that are coming out from this discussion and recommendations, policy papers on the international level. So there is a very rich policy discussion about the future in the view of the COVID and after COVID. Sustainability has become a leitmotif of recovery. Of different strategies at regional, national, and international level. One also senses a widespread of expectation that the pandemic legacy must include lasting environmental and social benefits. But what we can also sense in discussion and in the discourse is a traditional bipartisan divide on matters of the intervention in markets in general and housing markets in particular. And this discussion, as we know, it takes some time. Thinking forward, in medium term, what has been very interesting to look at, if looking at the discussion on the international arena right now, is increasing and raising consensus about one point, and that is investment in social and affordable housing. That has not been a time before where different international organizations, governments, some of them, especially here highlighting investors, and as well as cities, were on this point together. And I think that this consensus in this time of uncertainty, this point that brings us all together, is something worth building on now. Of course, one can think about many solutions and recommendations, but I believe that in times of uncertainty, having a point that brings us together, a platform around on which we can collaborate, is very important, because we're just 4 months out of the confinement. So we are in plein crise. We are really in the midst of crisis, and I think that this is a very positive development. Hand in hand with this joint interest in investment in social and affordable housing is, of course, renovation of existing housing stock to make it more environmentally and climate friendly. So I think that this is the good time, actually, to give the microphone to my colleague in Vienna. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Orna. And yes, a sort of positive note to think about what we might be able to do next, although obviously very worrying to see how the crisis has been affecting those on the lowest incomes and insecure housing, sort of speeding up the issues that were already there, I guess, across many countries.
My home is where I want to grow old.
My home means everything to me.
My home is the heart of the family.
Home is beautifully designed.
My home is warm.
My home is where I feel safe.